When you dare to take a breath, don't care about no medals on your chest. You're a steely-eyed killer shadow in the night. You were born to fight. You gotta light 'em up.
Welcome to Straight Outta Combat Radio, audio medicine from Green Zone Hero. We're proudly American, unapologetically patriotic, and politically incorrect. We are the voice, the platform for transitioning veterans, honoring their stories and wisdom.
Save us all before they burn it down.
Welcome to Straight Outta Combat. I'm John Krotek, U.S. Army veteran.
And I'm Chris Hager, Gold Star father.
Our veteran guest today for this episode is Congressman Ron DeSantis. And before we get started here, I've got to read this bio. This is impressive. You need to hear this. Ron's actually a native Floridian, like myself, with blue-collar roots who knows the value of hard work. He grew up not far from here in Dunedin, Florida, and worked his way through Yale University, where he graduated magna cum laude and was the captain of the varsity baseball team. He also graduated with honors from Harvard Law School. While studying at Harvard, he earned a commission as a JAG officer in the United States Navy. During his naval service, he deployed to Iraq during the 2007 troop surge as an advisor to a U.S. Navy SEAL commander in support of the SEAL mission in Iraq, and also served at the terrorist detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. His military decorations include the Bronze Star for meritorious service, the Navy Marine Corps Commendation Medal, Gold Star in lieu of a second award, the Navy Marine Corps Achievement Medal, and the Iraq Campaign Medal. Ron currently is a lieutenant commander in the reserve component of the United States Navy. Ron has also served as both a federal and military prosecutor, prosecuting a wide range of cases, including child exploitation, theft of sensitive military property, corruption, and child abuse. Since joining the United States Congress in 2013, the congressman has been a leader on issues ranging from government accountability, fiscal responsibility, national security, and the United States Constitution. He has helped spearhead efforts to investigate the misdeeds of the IRS, reform the VA, enact term limits, balance the budget, and make members of Congress live under the same rules as everybody else. As the chairman of the National Security Subcommittee and as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, he is deeply engaged in developing policies to combat foreign threats, to support key allies, and to fully equip and train our military. Ron lives in Marineland, Florida, with his wife, Casey, an Emmy Award-winning television host, and their baby daughter, Madison. Welcome, sir.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
It's an honor again to meet you, and we really do value not only the way you represent Florida, but the way you represent our military. And for this audience and for this father and for John, I know that means a lot.
It sure does, and we know you guys and gals are busy. We know that you're taking time out of your day to be here on Straight Outta Combat. And, this is a show about you, sir. It's about combat veterans, your background, what your military duty was like, what you're doing now. We just read pretty much what you're doing now, and what your message is to combat veterans returning from deployment, and what you'd like the United States population that's not veteran know about combat veterans. It's a lot there. But anyhow, tell us about, Congressman, where you grew up and what that was all about.
Well, I'm a native Floridian. I was born in Jacksonville. We moved to Orlando, and then I ended up in Dunedin when I was probably in about first grade. And my thing growing up was playing baseball. My Little League team, we went to the Little League World Series in Williamsport, finished sixth in the world. We had a good high school program. We were runner-up in the state my senior year, and that was kind of my thing. And I wanted baseball to take me, to college and hopefully beyond as far as I could play. My junior year ended, and I started to get recruited by schools like Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, where I'd never been to New England in my life. But because I had a 4.0 and I had good SAT scores, they looked at me as the type of guy that would be able to do the work and then that could play up there. So I ended up going to Yale for baseball. I showed up having never been in that part of the country before. I had jean shorts on, a T-shirt, and I show up.
Typical Florida guy,
and,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you look at the Florida-Georgia game, even Georgia fans, would make fun of Florida fans for wearing jean shorts. So you show up to Yale, just imagine what these Andover and Exeter and Groton kids thought. I mean, I was a total hayseed, and but I played 4 years there. I was the captain my senior year. Eventually went.
What was
to
your
Harvard Law
position?
School,
What position?
I was an outfielder, so I hit 3, 4, 5 depending on the year, kind of in the middle of our order, and I was a good, solid college player. I would have loved to have played as far as I could have, but realistically, playing 4 years in college at a Division I program, was good, and I didn't want to try to pursue playing in like some ragtag league. I just felt that you got to kind of move on if that's the case. So
Right.
I ended up going to Harvard Law School, and then this was kind of the whole 9/11 thing happens, and then the run up to the Iraq campaign. So that was really, I think, what got me. I would think I was always interested in the military. Yale banned ROTC then, so there was literally zero visibility for any type of military on Yale's campus.
They banned ROTC.
It was banned, and it was a legacy somewhat of the Vietnam War. But a lot of these so-called elite schools, they would not allow military recruiters on campus. They would not allow an ROTC program. So back then, you would have to go, if you were going to school at Yale and you wanted to do ROTC, you would have to travel to Central Connecticut State, which I think was like an hour away.
Wow.
So they did not make it easy at all. And so I think I would have been interested in it even before 9/11, but it was not something that was really present at all. And then I was playing athletics. I mean, I was a blue collar kid. I had to work jobs to get to pay for school. I'm studying my butt off because I thought doing well there, and I ended up graduating magna cum laude. That wasn't easy. I mean, I had to really put in a lot of time. And then, of course, you're playing baseball, effectively the whole year because there is a fall season, and then even when the fall season ends, you're lifting weights, you're doing all that, and then you get into the spring and you have your full season. So there's a lot going on. When I got to Harvard Law School, it was a much different time for our country, and my view is, yeah, we don't have a draft, but it's like, in World War II, everyone participated. I mean, now we're at war with, militant Islam, and I thought that I had to use whatever skills I could to benefit the country, and I wanted to raise my hand and do that. And so I ended up commissioning while I was in school there. And incidentally, Harvard did not allow ROTC or any of the military recruiters either. So I had to go to Newport, Rhode Island, and do all the stuff to kind of qualify for this. But
did you get some flack from staff and students at Harvard when they found out?
It was, it wasn't flack because I think it was still close enough to 9/11 where people were not necessarily, I mean, even though the administration at Harvard banned the military, like the students, even though a lot of them had no clue about anything about the military, they were not yet at a point where they would have necessarily said anything bad. But I definitely remember people would ask me what I was doing, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to Newport, Rhode Island, for the Navy, and they just looked at me like, why? And just like, you could make hundreds of thousands of dollars and you're joining the military. It was like people were just so perplexed. In a place like Harvard, like at the law school there's 550 kids in each class. My second and third years, the employers come to campus, and there are something like 2,500 different employers
Wow.
who come to campus for 550 students
Incredible.
in each class. And so it's just kind of an embarrassment of riches. And a lot of these kids have a lot of opportunity, not just and not even really just limited to law. I mean, like the hedge funds would come and recruit. I mean, you really could do very well financially, if you wanted to do that. And I was in a situation where since I didn't do it through ROTC, I did a direct commission. I wasn't getting any money for doing it. I was kind of doing it. So, that was one thing I was just trying to figure out is, okay, I'm going to be an ensign soon. I look at that pay table, and I'm just like, it's not that I needed, like I was like in it for the money, but I was like, okay, I got student loans I got to pay. I got to make sure I'm okay with this. And I figured, I could do it. And so we ended up doing that. And and so then I ended up being an active duty officer.
Good for you. We're listening to Straight Outta Combat Radio today, and our guest today is Congressman Ron DeSantis. That's incredible. And listening to your story, sir, you're obviously driven. It wasn't easy playing baseball, at a 1A school, and not easy, going into law. My brother's an attorney. I was his roommate when he was in law school down here in Stetson, so I get it. But what drives you? You're obviously driven, and you did things against the grain. What drives you?
Well, I think it's, I always believed as a kid that in the United States, it didn't necessarily matter where you came from. It didn't necessarily matter, what side of town you were on. But if you worked hard, that you could really get ahead and realize your dreams. And so I thought, man, aren't we lucky to live in this country? And I just felt that when I woke up in the morning and looked in the mirror, I wanted to be able to look at myself and say, you know what, you're getting the most out of your God-given talent. You're making a difference, for our country. And that was just something that mattered to me. And so I just think I would have felt really like I was leaving something on the table if I had not taken the opportunity to serve, even though it necessarily wasn't a good financial decision. It was just something that I think I look back throughout American history, and people would always stand up to defend the country in whatever capacity they could. We kind of were losing that, as we got into my generation. And that's one of the things I think that really stuck with me from, my experience, particularly deploying, was just how few Americans were in even that pipeline to be deploying, how few communities were necessarily even affected by the Afghanistan campaigns, the Iraq campaigns, whereas if you look at World War II, I mean, the whole society, every single town, everyone knew people, that veterans. When we were doing the Iraq stuff, there were most people, it was like just the world was just kind of going on. And yeah, we had people out there who were fighting and dying, but it was not something that really was on the front burner for most Americans in our society. And that was something that always bothered me.
I've told the story in April after my son had been killed in February. I'm driving down Sarasota, and there's a protest going on. The people are bushlight, people died, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at my wife and I said, do you think I can ask him a question? And she says, well, don't hit anybody. And I said, okay. So I got out, and there were 25 or 30 fairly old adults, chanting and doing all that stuff by the Social Security building. And I said, excuse me, is there anyone here who knows someone who served? And the only thing they could do was call me names. They didn't even know anybody had been in service, but they're protesting. We do have a disconnect.
And it was the type of thing, too, when I was getting ready to deploy, there was all this hullabaloo on Capitol Hill and in the news about you had Petraeus that had just been installed as the commander in Iraq. They had started this new strategy, and it was still pretty early, but Petraeus was saying, hey, we're approaching it differently. We're starting to see some dividends. And you had people like Harry Reid who said, oh, it's lost, this is BS. And I just thought that it was, look, even if you don't think things are going well, why would you be saying things like that? What does that do to the morale of the people who are getting ready to ship out and ship over there? And so I thought that there were just certain folks, obviously those protesters, like, look, you don't like the president, okay, fine, but why would you do some of the things that you're doing, realizing the men and women who were in harm's way? I think it's interesting, though, all those protesters, they magically just disappeared as soon as Bush left office and Obama took office.
Yeah,
we lost more service members in Afghanistan under Obama, way more than we did under George W. Bush. But it's just you didn't see those people out there protesting. And so one of the things that bugs me about it is, like, this is a lot of just kind of using combat deaths for your political agenda. It's not like they really cared about the combat deaths overall. It was just they didn't like Bush, and so they wanted to leverage that, as kind of a 2x4 to hit him politically. As soon as Obama was in there and they were more aligned with him, they were not doing these same stunts.
Yeah, you raise a good point there, Ron. We interviewed a lady earlier that was a public affairs officer, and she was there during the surge, and she said, before the surge, there was 25% of the news coming out of Baghdad was great news. But once the surge started, they didn't want to report anything good that was happening. And the news stories that came out of there actually dropped to a 3% good story feel. And she said it was amazing how it just switched like that. And you point that out, to use the deaths of service people for political agenda is, reprehensible in one regard, but in another case, it's just disingenuous.
Without question.
Tell us about your service in Iraq. I know you supported a SEAL commander, and if you can, the Bronze Star.
It was the type of thing where, it was the type of thing where we were not. I did not necessarily need to serve with NSW or even go to Iraq, but it was something that I sought out because I thought that's where folks are going. That's where, and Iraq was like the big deal. because we had really a disastrous 2006 in many ways, at least 2005, 2006. That was when the war was very unpopular. Rumsfeld got sacked at the end of 2006. Republicans lost the Congress largely because of the blowback over what was going on in Iraq. And so, my view, I was like, look, I that's what I want to do. I don't, because in the Navy you can go on ships, you can do anything, and that's good too. But I really wanted to do that, and so in the Navy, the Navy SEALs were kind of the ones who were in that fight all the time. So I got assigned to SEAL Team 1 to work for the commander of Team 1, and that involved, we were out in Coronado for months for sure, because you do like a training workup. You go out to the California desert, you kind of do the mock operation. So I'm with the commander in the tactical operations center. So you kind of do all that, and then they had me. I was able to go get some weapons and other types of training with some of the special operators, which was really good and very helpful. And so then we ended up deploying out there, and so we had the command node, which was what I was a part of. We were in Fallujah. We had a task unit stationed in Fallujah. We had a task unit stationed in Ramadi, which was very, very tough neighborhood at that time. And then we had a task unit stationed in El Asad, which is one of the big air bases out in the Sunni Arab part of Iraq. And then all the other little cities, there were different platoons in. So like Haditha, Hit, Al-Qaim, Al-Taqaddum, some of those areas. And, those guys, they work at night. And so the day is kind of, people will sleep from like 10 a.m. to like 4 p.m. or whatever, however you do it, just in the middle of the day. And then once you start to get into the late afternoon, that's when everyone's getting ready. And we would be running multiple operations a night a lot of times. And it's basically all night. I had to help the commander kind of synthesize the intelligence they were getting with the different ROEs that were present in the area, and those things can be restrictive. And so my basic role was, okay, tell me what you want to accomplish, and we'll make it work. And that was kind of what so they liked me a lot because of that, because I wasn't trying to stymie their mission. I was trying to facilitate it. But if you have guys, what they would do, Al-Qaeda would, they would hide IEDs in like mosques and machine guns in mosques and stuff, because that's a sensitive thing. And so how do you approach a mosque operation or things involving that? And there were just ways that you had to deal with it. And as special operators, they're not controlling battle space. They're operating within the battle space, but the battle space in Western Iraq was controlled mostly by the Marine Corps. There was in Ramadi, as part of the surge force, there was an Army brigade that was put into that part of Al Anbar province. And so, you're working with those battle space owners to be able to execute the missions. And so So that was kind of on the front end, and then on the back end, we would bring the guys in. We had an interrogation program set up. We had the detainee operations program set up, and there, the goal for those guys is to get as much intelligence as possible immediately after capture, so that you can then put that back into the field and then try to find some of the other bad guys to either capture or kill those guys. And but then what happens after that is, once that's kind of exhausted, we had this whole Byzantine detainee operation system that was set out throughout Iraq, where these detainees would end up going through. And the problem with that is it ends up being very bureaucratic. You get detainees who may go from, maybe they're captured in Ramadi, maybe they get sent after a week to a regional facility, maybe run by the Marines in Fallujah, and then maybe 3 weeks later they get sent to Camp Cropper in Baghdad. Well, they get to Cropper, and it's like, okay, who the hell is this guy? And there were examples before we had gotten there of some pretty bad dudes who ended up getting released because people just didn't have the adequate intel on them. They actually released, I think it was in 2004, so this is a couple years before I was there, but I think they actually released al-Baghdadi. Not that they did it intentionally, but they just didn't know it. So I thought it was just absolutely critical that any of these detainees that our guys risk their lives for, when they're going through and they end up in any of these places, I wanted to be sure that whoever was in charge of that individual's custody and control, that they had the intelligence on this individual, they had whatever information they needed to know that that person was a threat to the security of Iraq and to U.S. forces. And I didn't want to see any of these people released who should not have been released. We were also at that time trying, because this was a counterinsurgency mission, so there was the special operators are obviously going out trying to capture and kill bad guys, but you also have folks in theater who are trying to work with the Iraqi government to actually establish a functioning government and establish some type of rule of law. So in some of these detainees, if there was an adequate basis for it, we actually routed some of them through the Iraqi court system. And the Iraqi court system is not like the American system. I mean, it's like, they can do this pretty quickly sometime. I mean, so they would run these guys through, and some of these guys would get death sentences just on the spot. I mean, it was really, really different from our thing. But the challenge with that is anyone you bring into their system, an infidel's testimony is not something that they'll really accept. So you really had to have some of the Iraqi partners helping facilitate those cases, because I couldn't just have me or one of the operators go in there and give testimony that would be really accepted. It's really a discriminatory system, but nevertheless, that's what we were working for. So there were all those things kind of on the back end that you do. And I just remember, one being very tired at the end of it because you're kind of doing it nonstop. But the other thing I remember is just, I would travel around the country for different reasons, and I remember just being with like some of these Army guys or some of these Marines. The Army guys at the time, they were on a 15-month deployment. So I think they had gotten there like early November of 2006, and they were going to be there through sometime in January of 2008. So if you think about that, I mean, they're likely missing 2 different Thanksgivings, 2 Christmases, birthdays, all this other stuff.
All right.
And the thing is some of these guys are on like their 2nd, 3rd, or 4th deployment. I mean, this is 2007, and since 2001, some of these guys had spent more time in Iraq and Afghanistan than they had in the United States. And that made an impression on me because this was not a society-wide effort. This is really a small sliver of our society who was shouldering
the brunt,
an inordinate burden. That's one of the reasons I've gotten involved in like the PTS and trying to help the vets with that, because that's just not normal for human beings to be going into that environment, coming back, going back. And
were you married?
Were
you married over there, sir? Were you married when you were serving?
I was not married yet. So my wife and I, we were an item. We got engaged when I got back from deployment. But I tell you, I mean, it was, we weren't even married yet, but I think if you talk to her, she'll tell you that it was really, really tough to have someone that you care about over there. So just imagine when you have folks who are married, who have kids, and what that can do. It puts a lot of stress on the families. There's just no doubt about it. And
my son,
I
Army
remember
Ranger.
seeing,
my son, Army Ranger, went to Corregidor, East Ramadi in November of '06, and 70 plus combat missions in 90 days. I mean, it was a hellhole.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And the thing is it's just some of these guys, you'd have guys in their mid-20s who were already on their second and third marriages because there's just some spouses just aren't gonna deal with that type of commitment. That's just unfortunately the reality. So it was tough on these guys who were going over again and again. I mean, obviously you're in harm's way, you're risking your life. Some give their life, which is hard enough. But then you're thinking about it's not just me going home and everything's fine. I mean, a lot of times there were problems on the home front just because of the stress of the whole situation.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. We've talked to many combat veterans, and you pointed out, obviously very compassionate and heartfelt about it. What was your transition like? Because you were over there in harm's way too. You don't get Bronze Stars for, kicking back at the lounge. What was it like when you got back home?
It was a little surreal. I mean, we were fortunate that by the time we left, which was sometime in the spring of 2008. I mean, if you did a graph from September of '07 until when we left of the violence in Al Anbar province, I mean, it went plummeted. In fact, I remember by the time we left, we were actually taking rides in the birds during the daytime, which was totally verboten before then, because you're just a sitting duck if you're doing that in the day. But they felt I think the commanders felt that we had the situation under control a lot. So I think leaving it was a little bit surreal because we did actually feel like things had changed for the better, and it wasn't necessarily quite as intense as it was when you first get there, and there's just so much stuff that was going on. And so I remember getting back. We flew from Iraq to Spengalum, Germany. Then we went Spengalum, Germany to Coronado, California. And I just remember after being in Iraq in the desert for however long we were there, you get out on Coronado, and the air is just so fresh and crisp, and you just feel you're just like, oh man, thank God I'm back home. So I think for us it was probably a little bit easier of a transition than some of the folks who were there at the absolute worst time. I mean, we got there at a time when things started to turn around, and by the time we left, I think we had pretty much defeated AQI in Al Anbar province.
Masterful job. There's some people that would say, well, the surge didn't work, but it obviously did. I know now, though, you're in a different world because, I was actually in your house or your office, house on Capitol Hill back in 2015. We were up there on a veterans issue, but that's a different world up there too. And so, you're seeing the best or the worst of all the worlds, I guess. What's it like now? What's going on up there now?
Well, it can be frustrating in the Congress. I mean, we're starting to get a little bit of more of veterans, but I think as of 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was the lowest percentage of veterans in the Congress in a generation, or more than a generation. I mean, I think you got to go back probably to before the Civil War, maybe even. You're starting to get a little bit more folks who have served. When you're dealing with issues involving national security, when you're dealing with issues involving our defense and our personnel, when you're dealing with issues involving the Veterans Administration and how our veterans are cared for, it really, really helps to have some frame of reference when you're dealing with those things. One of the things that I've been spearheading since I got to the Congress was this issue of post-traumatic stress. And my experience in Iraq, just seeing the repeated deployments, that really made an impression on me, that I was like, we've got to figure out, if we have 22 veterans committing suicide a day, what can we do to make an impact? And I ended up getting linked up with a group in my district called Canines for Warriors, where they would train these service dogs to be able to assist the veteran cope with the symptoms of PTS, and really had a remarkable record of getting those veterans suffering back into society and back into a productive lifestyle. And the thing is the VA, they just laughed when we talked to them about the service dogs. They did not recognize it. They would not do anything to assist veterans going that direction. So since I'm the chairman of the National Security Subcommittee, I have oversight over state, defense, the VA, and all those agencies. I did a hearing. We had a VA bureaucrat there saying, this is unproven, we don't know. And then I had a Marine who had a great story about how he was in the dumps and got his life back on track after he got a service dog. I had the head of one of the organizations, Canines for Warriors, and then I had a group from like the Human Animal Bond Initiatives to saying, this is working. There's research, and it
That's
really
awesome
embarrassed
work.
the VA.
Yeah.
So, what they ended up doing is I did it to pump my bill, the PAWS Act, which we still want to do, but we got the VA to, when Shulkin came in, launch a program where if a veteran is symptomatic after going through the counseling and getting the drugs prescribed, which is basically the VA's formula, that they now have an option to get paired with a service dog. And they're evaluating the results, but I think the results are going to be positive.
I know they're going to be positive because I know from vets that have dogs. I mean, it's preposterous to not understand and recognize that.
That's awesome work, Congressman. But, I understand that dogs can actually pick up on pheromone and hormone levels, and they can actually, when a guy's going through anxiety or high stress, a dog can get him out of that space.
Without question, and that happens when veterans are in social situations where that stress is being triggered. The dog can be trained to identify that and assist the veteran. If a veteran is having maybe a nightmare, the dog is trained to be able to help mitigate that. And I've had veterans come up to me and say, I really appreciate what you're doing because I was fortunate enough to get a service dog, but I can tell you, had I not gotten my service dog when I did, I probably would have ended up committing suicide because that's just how low some of the guys were at the time. So when you see that, you're like, okay, we've got to get going here. And the thing is it costs some money to train them and to do all that, but the amount of money that you're spending on these drugs is huge money. I mean, if that's not working, why wouldn't you want to divert some of those funds to this? And here's the deal: if you do the service dog and somehow it's not effective, well, it hasn't harmed anybody. I mean, someone's got a dog. I mean, big deal. We'll figure something else out for the veteran to try to help him out. But it has been very effective. I mean, I think that if you look at the preliminary research, you see a really noticeable decline in use of prescription drugs for veterans who do get the service dogs when they're suffering from post-traumatic stress. Productivity increases, and you see them come into my office all the time. I mean, they have great stories to tell.
That's awesome work.
Equine therapy does some of the similar kinds of things, and the research on the electromagnetic field that surrounds a horse is big enough and strong enough that it can change the emotional and physiological component of a person beside him. I mean, that stuff is real.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it.
What do you want? I know our time's short, but what do you want the American public to know about combat veterans?
Well, I think the public, particularly in this day and age where so few of our citizens really have any connection with any combat veterans, that these are folks who are writing a check to the United States for an amount payable for anything up to and including that individual's life. And that's not something that's done lightly by people, but when these people do it, they are putting it all on the line. And I don't care how great your Declaration of Independence is, and ours is great, how great your Constitution is, and ours is great. If you don't have people who are willing to go out there, put on the cloth of their country, and risk their lives, then those principles that we like so much, ultimately won't stand the test of time. You got to have people who are willing to defend it, and that's the American combat veteran.
Well stated, sir. And if you could say something to your brothers and sisters in uniform that are coming back and they're in those places, what would you want them to know?
Well, a couple things. One is I think it's incumbent upon people who are in the Congress to make sure that our military has the resources it needs to accomplish the missions of the future. I also think it's important that people who are directing the military are always doing it in a way that's putting out a clear objective and doing whatever it needs to achieve the objective. And then when people leave the service, I think it's a lifetime commitment from society to care for those folks who have borne the cost of battle for us. And so that's why things like the VA, we've actually done some good things lately. It's still a big bureaucracy. We just got to constantly be on that so that veterans are getting the care that they need.
That's great. What's in the future for you, sir?
Well, probably about a week and a half ago, I announced that I'm going to be running for governor of Florida in 2018, and people can go to rondesantis.com and check that out. But I think it's a good opportunity to really exercise leadership. That's one of the things in the military that you really get is understanding how to be a leader. In Congress, I've done a lot. I've been very active, and I have a great record. But I'm one of 435. As governor, you can set the agenda, and you can pursue the agenda, spend capital to achieve the agenda, and really do some good things for your state. And so in a state with 1.8 million veterans, in a state that has an opportunity to really have significant economic growth, a state that has the opportunity to be a leader in education reform, I think it's a good opportunity, and I will lead with the ethos that I learned serving our country.
Well, thank you for that. And we really appreciate your time here with us on Straight Outta Combat, and we look forward to the future. Chris and I are both residents of Florida, and I'm pretty sure I know where my vote's going to go.
Well, I appreciate that.
Just saying.
And thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Ron, Congressman, there is something that we miss so much in the public domain, but we've been honored on Straight Outta Combat Radio to have authenticity. So many of the individuals with whom we've spoken, you can hear the truth in their words, and I give that to you as a compliment. We can hear your sincerity and your authenticity in your words, and it means a lot. And Godspeed, God bless.
Well, God bless you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Congressman. Chris, there's another dose of audio medicine from Green Zone Hero, Straight Outta Combat Radio. One thing that struck me, and you did mention it there at the end about his authenticity, and what came through in the congressman's voice to me and in his demeanor was his compassion. And when he talked about the numerous deployments of the younger soldiers, younger Marines, Navy personnel, you could just hear the compassion. And, like he said, nobody should have to go through multiple deployments. And then he even talked about the low percentage of people that are actually defending our rights.
But did you notice he never used the word I? I mean, this was not about himself, and that's what it is service. I mean, he demonstrates not only the command leadership skills that the military teaches, but just the decency of recognizing the soldier with boots on the ground, the Army guy, the Marine that are there for those months. I mean, there's no ego there.
It probably really isn't a surprise, but it has been an eye-opener, and you point that out, Chris, that every single person that we have interviewed on our podcast, Straight Outta Combat, has been selfless. I haven't heard any excuses. I haven't heard any finger pointing.
No.
It's always been about honor and duty and country.
And no victimhood.
No victimhood. And how important it is for us to remember that there's a price to pay for what we've got.
Yeah. And he, as Ron said, they're writing checks that include the life.
Absolutely. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on yet another episode of Straight Outta Combat Radio. We're proudly American here. We look at the flag here every day. Unapologetically patriotic and politically incorrect. And we want everybody who tunes in to remember
that freedom is not free. God bless you, John.
God bless, Chris. Thank you.
Save us all before they burn it down.